Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Mary Belknap Distinguished Lecture. I'm Noel Lateef, President of the Foreign Policy Association, and I'm really pleased that we have with us this evening Norton Belknap and Norton and Mary's daughter, Paula Reynolds. This was Mary's club, and I think she would approve of the venue, and she would also approve of the topic. I know that in our conversations, Mary brought up the subject of U.S. relations with Iran on more than one occasion. Our speaker, I am told, could give this talk this evening in fluent Farsi, but we've persuaded him to give it in English. To formally introduce Ambassador Limbert, I will turn to Michael Coles, a former chairman of the Foreign Policy Association and a good friend of Mary's. Michael?
Thank you. Good evening. I'm honored to introduce Ambassador John Limbert, the distinguished speaker for tonight's 2013 Mary Belknap Lecture. My main qualification for this pleasant task is the fact that during the 3 years I served as chairman of this splendid organization, I was fortunate enough to have Mary as my vice chair. In fact, Mary lasted in her role a lot longer than I did in mine. Largely, I believe, because of her long-standing devotion to the organization and her extraordinary stamina. Every institution needs a memory, and Mary was this one's. She had a keenly developed knowledge of the subject matter and very well, okay, excuse me. Where was I? Sorry. And very well honed political instincts. She made my job almost too easy. I hope Norton will understand, and my wife too, when I say that, like him, I loved her. After her death, some of us decided to preserve her memory within this organization by endowing a series of lectures in her honor, which is why we're all here tonight. Ambassador Limbert has indeed had a distinguished career and an exciting one, and I'm sure he'll forgive me if I keep the exciting part until last. The ambassador, who holds bachelor, master's, and doctoral degrees from Harvard, joined the Foreign Service in 1973 after teaching in Iran and serving time in the Peace Corps. His overseas Foreign Service experience includes considerable time in such desirable places as Algeria, Djibouti, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Mauritania, called a life of sacrifice. In 2003, he's one of the first, excuse me, non-military officials to enter Baghdad with responsibility for cultural affairs and museum restoration, returning later with the U.S. mission to Iraq. Nearer home, he played a number of significant roles within the State Department, including Deputy Coordinator for Counterterrorism. After retiring from the Foreign Service in 2006, Ambassador Limbert was appointed Distinguished Professor of International Affairs at the United States Naval Academy, a position he still holds. Probably the most memorable of Ambassador Limbert's experience, though almost certainly the least enjoyable, was his most recent time in Iran, where he served as a political officer, arriving in August 1979, just 12 weeks before the embassy there was captured. He left with the other hostages in January 1981. I will leave to him how much he still wants to talk about that unpleasant period in his life. But you will note that he has given us the benefit of his extensive knowledge of Iran by authoring one of this year's FPA Great Decisions. He holds the Department of State's highest award, its Distinguished Service Award, and its award for valor. I would suggest that his service represents the kind of loyalty, integrity, and intellectual stamina that exists widely in the Foreign Service, but unfortunately remains often unrecognized until WikiLeaks material exposes it. Ambassador Limbert.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Michael, no, thank you very much. Noel and dear friends from New York, many thanks for hosting me. I mean, listening to that introduction, very kind introduction, I'm reminded of something I was reading recently about a study at the university, I think it was at the University of California. A sociologist did a study, a sociologist or a psychologist did a study, and the purpose was to find out at what point flattery is no longer effective. And they had groups and sessions and they did research and they checked things out and they recalibrated their data and they used computer models. And after a long bit of research, I think you can guess what they found, which is, of course, there's no such point. It simply doesn't exist. Well, that sort of leads me to Iran because, of course, our Iranian friends, if you've ever had the pleasure of knowing Iranians and their wonderful culture and warmth, they have known this fact for, I think, at least 3,000 years. Now, here we and Iran are encountering each other 33 years ago, almost to the day. This is April 1980. This is a pretty fuzzy picture, but it's taken off of Iranian television. And the gentleman on the left is the current supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei. The gentleman on your right is this current supreme leader. The gentleman on your left, you may recognize, you may not. Obviously, it's a much younger version of your speaker, tonight. This was not a very friendly encounter. And our encounters ever since, for the next 33 years, have been distinctly unfriendly. So my question I'm going to talk about tonight is, are we and the Iranians condemned to be enemies forever? Or is there another way that we can interact with each other? Let me begin on a personal note. My connections with Iran go back now over 50 years. As a student, as a researcher, as a teacher, as a diplomat, as a prisoner, all of those things. But probably most important to me, the deepest connection I have is as a family member. I'm a member of a very proud, cultured, well-educated Iranian-American family. My children are what we call 50-50s. The grandchildren are 25%, but all very proud of their heritage. But in the interest of full disclosure, as deep as my connections go and as strong as they are, I have no particular love for the current government there and the system. I always think, you know, someday my Iranian friends, my Iranian family members, they will get something better than what they have. They deserve something better. People with such culture, with such warmth, with such creativity, deserve a government that treats them decently. They don't have it. One day they will. But let's talk about the present state of U.S.-Iran relations, and it's no secret. I summarize it here in this slide. I call it, it's a road to nowhere. And this is where we've been. I mean, since this time, 33 years ago, we have been on this road. And you could say that I was there when the road was built. back in 1979. I was probably even there when they first awarded the contract to build the road. But what I did not believe was that we would be stuck on such a road for so long, for 33 years now. I thought after we were released in January of 1981 that tempers would cool and that we and the Iranians and the new Islamic Republic would be talking to each other, if not as friends necessarily, but as two states who had things to talk about and who wanted to avert a larger tragedy. Well, I was wrong. In fact, in the last 33 years, I've been wrong a lot about Iran. Most of my predictions, most of my things I thought would happen didn't. It has surprised me, it has surprised many people. Because in those last 3 decades, there's been no talking, friendly or otherwise. And in the absence of talking, subsequent American administrations, facing the very unpleasant reality of the Islamic Republic of Iran, have tried almost everything. I mean, after the appalling experiences of President Carter with the hostage crisis, and with President Reagan with the Iran-Contra scandal, which came, I'm told, within an eyelash of ending his presidency, most presidents simply said, this is too hard, this is too dangerous, and they would have preferred to ignore it. They would have preferred that Iran go away. But of course, it didn't. To paraphrase a former resident of New York, former New Yorker, and of course you all know who I'm referring to, it's Leon Trotsky. He said, you may have no business with war, but war has business with you. Well, we may have preferred to have no business with Iran, but Iran had business with us and has had it for a long time. So subsequent American presidents found themselves forced to deal with Iran. They tried everything. They couldn't ignore it. So what did they do? They tried to contain Iran, they tried to talk to it, they tried to bribe it, they tried to change its government, they tried to threaten it, they tried to make peace with it, but so far nothing has worked and we're still on this particular road. And when we look back at the landscape and we look at this road over the last 3 decades, we see it littered with the wrecks of efforts to do something about Iran, to change the existing stalemate. And all of these efforts have foundered on missteps, misreadings, bad luck, a lot of bad luck, bad timing, and bad assumptions. So, as a result, we remain 33 years after that first slide that I showed you, we remain on this road. And what exchanges do exist between us and the Iranians consist mostly of trading insults, trading accusations, and trading threats. Because that's what we know how to do after 33 years. We and the Iranians, for 33 years, have stood on opposite sides of an abyss, of a chasm. We glare at each other across this abyss, and we call each other names. They are names like Axis of Evil, or names like Great Satan. The result has been 30 years of futility and frustration, and a Cold War, which I fear threatens to become something worse than a Cold War. Now, why is this so? Why can't we get off of this road? Why are we stuck on this road to nowhere? What has made us captive of a vicious downward spiral of hostility that we seem unable to break? Well, I'm trained as a historian. I'm officially I was a diplomat for 33 years, although my wife laughs when anyone called me a diplomat. I'm not really very good at that. But my original training is my academic training is a historian. So, being a historian, let's start at the beginning. And the beginning is, here we have Daniel, the book of Daniel from the Old Testament. And the book of Daniel tells us about an empire of two peoples, the empire of the Medes and the Persians. Here you see these wonderful reliefs from Persepolis. I hope some of you have ever had the chance to visit there, but there you see Persian soldiers and Median soldiers in relief. And the book of Daniel tells us that these people had laws, and these were laws that alter not. Famous phrase, the laws of the Medes and the Persians that alter not. These were laws written in stone. Here you see some inscriptions in cuneiform. Now, this is 2,500 years ago, but for the last 30 years at least, such unalterable laws, unchangeable laws, written in stone, have also ruled Iranian-American relations. Here is what I think is the translation of this. I'm not a specialist in cuneiform, but I think this is the translation of this tablet. Here are the 5 rules, call them Limbert's 5 rules if you like, of current Iranian-American relations. It's the modern version of the laws of the Medes and the Persians that alter not. And both sides, and I emphasize this, both Tehran and Washington, for the last 33 years have been caught in the grip of these 5 unbreakable rules, or seemingly unbreakable rules. What are they? Well, of course, first, if you see an open door, never walk through it. Instead, bang your head against the wall. Much more satisfying, actually. Never say yes to anything the other side proposes. Because if you do, you'll look weak. It doesn't matter what it is. Could be a hotline, political, such as we had with the Soviet Union. It could be abandoning 20% nuclear enrichment. It could be easing certain economic sanctions. It could be, or anything else. But if the other side proposes it, never say yes. Never forget that the other side, number 3, never forget that the other side is infinitely hostile, infinitely devious, and it's infinitely domineering and infinitely irrational. In other words, the other side is the embodiment of evil. Never forget that. Number 4, really a corollary for number 3, never forget that anything the other side proposes must contain some sort of trick. They, the other, are always up to something. We may not know what it is. We may not understand it, but they are, because of their nature. Just now, if you think I'm making this up, I'm not. Just to give you well, I'll leave that for a minute and then get back with examples. Can bring up some examples during the Q&A. Finally, that last one doesn't really need much explanation. Just whenever you're making progress, someone or some bad diabolical coincidence is going to come along and screw things up. And we've seen many examples of that. Now, from where I sat, I was back. I retired from federal service, the Foreign Service in 2006. In 2009, 2010, I went back to the Clinton State Department to work on Iran. And from where I sat there, it seemed to me that the Obama administration was making and had made an honest effort to break these rules. If you look at what he had said in his campaign, even in his first inaugural address, to the TV station Al Arabiya 6 days after his inauguration, to the Iranian government and people at Persian New Year, in Cairo in June of 2009, in Oslo in December of 2009. There was, I thought, an honest effort to break these rules, to bring the relation to something more productive. Perhaps what I did not appreciate, and maybe no one appreciated, was just how difficult it was going to be to escape from these iron laws of the Medes and the Persians. Now, the sad irony is that it was not always this way between our two countries. If we go back farther, we find a very different story. For over 100 years, Iranians have been in a continuous and often losing struggle to become masters in their own house, to assert their dignity, and to assert their independence. And in that 100-year struggle, Americans were originally on the right side. We were on the side of those people struggling for freedom. Here, for example, is the grave of the young Howard Baskerville, who was taught in a missionary school in Tabriz. At the age of 24, he was killed fighting on the side of the Iranian constitutionalists against the people who want the reactionaries who were supporting the then Shah, backed by the Tsarist Russians. This is his grave. It still exists, is still taken care of in Tabriz. He is known in Iran as the Shahid Amrikai, the American martyr. Here is, a few years later, here is the team from the U.S. Treasury, led by a man named Morgan Schuster, who was to help the new constitutional government in Iran establish control over its finances. In other words, there could be no constitutional government unless you had a government that controlled income, expenditures, and a budget. And this was done with the help of the Americans. Here is what I think is one of the most fascinating pictures that I came across. This is a photo from the Tabriz, something called the Tabriz Memorial School. It was a missionary school in 1924, at a time when Iran's overall literacy rate was at maximum maybe 10%, maybe 10%. But look at the people in this slide who shared the ideal of education. There were American missionaries, both men and women. There were Iranian clerics, you see there sitting in the second row, men of religion, and westernized Iranians. You can see them from their the people in the hats and with the neckties. Now, these were people who probably couldn't agree on much of anything if you sat and talked with them, but they could work together on one goal, and the goal of education for young people. The sad reality is today you could never get a picture like this. You couldn't get people to sit together, these people to sit together. Here's another slide from that same struggle. This is from the 1950s, the early 1950s, when the Iranians were striving to get control over their one resource, their one source of income. And of course, that was their oil. That was their major economic resource, which had been in British hands for the last 40 years earlier. And the slogan on that banner, the very eloquent slogan, just by itself, it simply says, "Leave our country alone." That's all it says. Leave our country alone. And in this phase of the struggle, again, many Americans had sympathy for the Iranian nationalists and for their leader, the Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, whom we see here meeting President Truman at the White House. I think this is 1951. I believe this is 1951 when Prime Minister Mossadegh actually came to New York to argue Iran's case at the Security Council. Now, we know the sad ending to that story, that how the U.S. government, driven by Cold War and anti-communist imperatives, ended up siding with the British against the Iranian nationalists. Okay, that's history. Let's jump ahead. Let's come back to the present now. Problem now is this. President Obama's original attempts, which I noted earlier, to establish dialogue with Iran have not gone well. In 5 years of his administration, there's been exactly one high-level meeting between American and Iranian officials. That was in October of 2009 in Geneva. There have been, as far as I am aware, no others. And since we've been unable to establish a dialogue, to start a dialogue, what have both sides done? They have returned to the dysfunctional patterns of the past, and they have resumed doing what they know how to do. And what do they know how to do? They know how to bash each other. They know how to insult each other. They know how to call each other names. They know how to make life difficult for each other. I mean, in both capitals, being very frank here, that's one of the nice things about being out of the government service. In both capitals, people have made their careers on how well you can bash the other side. How do you make life difficult for the other side? And that's bashing is what both sides know how to do. They're good at it after 33 years. What we seem unable to do, however, is to change the relationship. That seems to be harder. And change it into something that actually benefits both sides. So what happens? Well, we go back to the dysfunctional. Here's a poster from Tehran, doesn't need a lot of explanation. And I leave you with this thought. Remember what happens. I would ask you to remember what happens when two sides in a dispute fail to communicate with each other, when they fail to talk. The other, whether you're looking from Tehran or from Washington, doesn't matter, becomes simultaneously superhuman, that is, capable of building an A-bomb, a nuclear weapon tomorrow, overthrowing the Islamic Republic with the push of a button, or anything else, closing the straits of Hormuz, sabotaging the Iranian economy, whatever else, superhuman, which we fear. So we fear the other side. At the same time, that other becomes not only superhuman, but subhuman. They become rats. I hate to say this, rats and cockroaches. Those are some of the metaphors that I've seen used. Not restrained, subhuman, meaning not restrained by any consideration of law, decency, humanity, religion, or morality. In other words, they will do anything. They are bound by no rules, no laws, no decency. And once that happens, once we establish this pattern in our minds, and I fear it is happening on both sides after 33 years of no communication, then we can rationalize the most extreme and the most ill-considered actions against an adversary, if that we consider that adversary both superhuman and subhuman at the same time, infinitely capable and infinitely evil. All right, I've done enough talking. I'd like to hear from you. Love to answer questions as well. I'll try to do that as well as I can. I think are there microphones around, Kako? Okay, as you can see from this picture, by this time, my Naval Academy students are usually at the edge of their chairs and very alert and ready to go. But we'll go on. We'll go on to questions, and we'll go back. We'll go back to the beginning. Okay. Am I using this? This is for me, and do you have microphones for the people? All right. Let's start down here. I know, sir, you had one.
You haven't addressed the nuclear problem that we have with Iran. And is it possible for us to do anything unless we can bridge that? And doesn't it require initiative on their part, not our part?
The question was about the nuclear. The question was about the nuclear issue. Well, I was afraid someone would ask about that. Here's my view, and it's not orthodoxy by any means. It's not orthodoxy by any means. But we can talk about that all night, and I'm willing to, certainly talk more about it. But in a 2-minute answer, it is one of the issues that we need to talk about with the Iranians. It's a serious issue, and it's one where we disagree, and it has the potential, if we don't resolve it, to leading to something much worse in the relationship. That'll certainly, and it certainly makes some of our friends quite uneasy as well, justifiably so. But my own view is that the nuclear issue has become so highly charged and so highly politicized that neither side, or put it this way, both sides have painted themselves into rhetorical corners, and that neither side is capable of making the kinds of gestures and compromises that the other side says it wants. I mean, what at the end is the deal? What at the end is the deal? The deal is Iran stops enriching to above 3.5%. Iran's right to enrich at that level is recognized, and that Iran agrees to a inspection regime by the international community. I mean, that's the deal we get. However, again, because of the nature of the problem and the way it has woven itself into the political fabric on both sides, neither side seems able to make those compromises the other side says it wants. If you'll forgive the phrase, the issue has become highly charged with testosterone. It's become a test of manhood on both sides. And add to that the level of mistrust, referring you back to rule number 3. Whatever the other side proposes has to contain some kind of a trick, unfortunately. My view is if we need to get beyond the nuclear issue. The nuclear issue by itself is just right now, I think, too hard. We've been working at it, we and our European and the Russians and the Chinese in the so-called P5+1 format have been working on it now in one way or another for about 10 years, and we're not making any progress. My own view is if all we talk about with the Iranians is nuclear stuff, is the nuclear issue, we're going to fail. Just because the issue is become too wrapped up in politics and political on both sides. We need to find something else where we can maybe break some of these rules. We can reach an agreement. We can agree maybe about Afghanistan. We can maybe agree about anti-narcotics. We can agree maybe about freedom of navigation issues in the Persian Gulf. In the Persian Gulf, and we will discover that if we say yes to something, we, in the larger sense, if we say yes to something, that the sky does not fall, and then maybe move back to the nuclear issue. That's a very brief. There's obviously a lot more, but that's my sort of 2-minute view of the thing. There's a question over there. Someone get a mic.
What do you think is the future of the Green Movement that manifested itself after the disputed election in 2009? And do you think the election that's scheduled for this year will prompt a similar response?
Okay. Remember what I said about how wrong I am about predictions? Take whatever I say with a huge grain of salt. Let me refer back to something Jimmy Carter said. And Jimmy Carter is an unusual source to talking about Iran because he gets blamed by both sides. The pro-Shah people blame him for Khomeini. The Khomeini people blame him for supporting the Shah, the revolutionary. But when he retired, when he left office, he set up the Carter Center, and one of the things they did was to election observe. And he said something once very interesting. He said, dictatorships have a vulnerability. The vulnerability is they think they're popular because they start believing their own propaganda. And that's their worst vulnerability. And if you can persuade them to allow a free election because they think they'll win it, you can get some very interesting results. And he was pointing to Nicaragua, what happened in Nicaragua with the Sandinistas who voted out, and other places. I think it's fair to say that the people in power in Tehran, who've been in power now for 33 years, uncontested, mostly unelected, are pretty clueless about the realities of their own society. Whether it's the Green Movement or somebody else. I will make one last point about this. I think from the United States point of view, we should be very careful about getting involved in internal Iranian political disputes. For example, I look at what happened in Iraq. I was there. I saw what happened in Iraq, where people were talking about setting up a new democracy in Iraq. Our track record of meddling in Iranian, other countries' political disputes is not very good. In the case of Iran, it's appalling. Yes, I would like to see something better come out. In the case of the Green Movement, there's some things I worry about. Some of the people involved in the Green Movement have very dubious pasts. You know who I'm talking about. Yes. Yeah. These are not people. These are people who were key figures in the Islamic Republic and some of the worst excesses of the Islamic Republic. So, I know that the president got blamed it's my age, maybe it's my training, but I'm very cautious about, in general, about getting involved in other people's political affairs. Yes, ma'am, right here.
Hi, I visited Iran in 2009, right before the election, and I've since made quite a few friends with sort of the hip-hop generation in Iran. From what I've gathered, from what they're telling me, this is mostly coming from people in their early 20s, they think that poverty helps, just the fact when people are super poor, they're more likely to get inducted into the siege and some of the security forces that are part of the Revolutionary Guards. And in terms of sanctions, like, it seems to be impacting the middle class, which was very more supportive of more liberty and stuff. So in your opinion, is it possible that the really harsh heavy-duty sanctions we've got against them now may be actually backfiring in terms of wanting to have quite a more progressive government?
Thank you for your question. I'm jealous. I've not been back to Iran since 1981. That's not my choice. I would love to go back. I'd love to take my children back. They were both born there, and get my grandchildren back there to see it, to see where all of their grandmother's wonderful food comes from. And you're hitting on something key. I agree with you. The problem is when and how. That's uncallable, I think. And we have the experience of the Arab Spring, for example, in front of us, which very few people predicted. We had the experience of the Islamic Revolution itself, which in Iran, which very few people predicted. But what I think you can say, and talk about the young people, is that you have what it seems to me you have in Iran, and not just Iran, but other places as well, was this growing separation between state and society. Society, these are people who are young, they're well educated, they're active, they're creative, they're aware. This is not the Hermit Kingdom. This is not North Korea. This is not North Korea. These are smart people. They're look at Iranian films. I mean, you had one 2 years ago that won the Oscar for best foreign. Pretty impressive. Still, it was a great film. These are creative, aware, smart people. That's society. State, however, is increasingly cut off, detached, isolated, and its only response that it knows is suppression. I mean, they believe in the slogan, what is it called? Nothing succeeds like suppress. That seems to be their. Well, I think, my experience, I would say, that kind of situation is not terrible. But what you don't know, what I can't say is when, and do outsiders have any role in steering, guiding, helping, whatever else it is. If we could wake up tomorrow and find that the Islamic Republic is gone, or we could wake up 10 years from now and find it's still around. But it is extremely vulnerable. It knows it's vulnerable. It has, just in foreign policy recently, been humiliated. But that doesn't give me comfort. That makes me worried, because it's very likely that the cornered cat, the Iranian poet Sadi used to talk about, it lashes out and does something rash and irrational. So yes, I agree with you, but what I cannot say is exactly when and how. Okay. Can we go to the back?
You are a historian, and certainly you try to teach us from the past so we can understand better our future. So would you apply your approach, your philosophy, to Nazi Germany? To Nazi Germany, would you apply same philosophy, same approach to talk, to understand better, to find some topics for negotiation?
No. The answer is no. I
it that way. But again, I'm not an expert in European history, in modern European history, but I don't see that. I don't see that at all. And again, looking back, I'm not a professional historian of that period. But if you look, I don't know if you're familiar. A book I just read. I don't know if I would recommend it, called "In the Garden of the Beast." Yeah, about our ambassador, Ambassador Dodd, in Germany between 1933 and 1937. He saw what was going on. He saw very well, as did some of his people. And I think the approach was very different. But it's a good question. Try down here.
My husband and I also spent the month before the last election in Iran. And my perception, and I would say we were in a group of about 10 people who were well-traveled from around the world. We weren't a political mission, we were an arts mission, but we went all over the country and we had pretty good access and pretty good investigation. Anyway, my perception on this is Iranians are Persians first, and they think they have the right to their country, and they think their country is one of the great countries of the world, irrespective of the religious situation now. And many young Iranians said to us when we discovered the green symbol that we would all take a look at it and provoke. People were always talking to us, they love us, it's the only country I've ever been in the world, where people came to me and said, America, you're American, that's fabulous, America's just like us. And it's interesting because it's the opposite of what you'd expect them to say, but they're very proud of their country, and that's why I say they're Persians first in our perception of this. But I think they even told us they were out for Masadi, even though they thought he might not be as good, he might be worse than Ahmadinejad, but they wanted to express themselves. And my sense of it is these people, while they're not so happy with their government, they absolutely want their atomic position because they want to be world leaders. So, when we get them, when they have their revolution, when they take their role, they're still going to want what Western Europe and the United States doesn't want them to have, in my opinion.
No, that's a very good point. Some people I often talk about the Iranians because, has everyone in this room heard about the Iranian Threat? Has everyone here heard of that? You can't, where I live in Washington, a day doesn't go by when there's not a think tank event or some pundit or someone is out there droning on about the Iranian threat. Well, the reality is, as you point out, the Iranians are culturally and religiously isolated. I call them the Bretons of the Middle East. You study the history of the Crusade, any of you study the history of the Crusades. Well, the Crusades, when the first Crusade went off in about 1099, a contingent of soldiers from Brittany showed up. And people said, well, who are you? And they said, we're just like you. We're Christians like you. We want to join the crusade. And they said, well, wait a minute. You speak a language no one else understands, and you worship saints that no one's ever heard of. Well, the Iranians are the same way. They're isolated out there. They're isolated, but they're also very proud of their culture, as many people are. But the reality is that for the last 100 years, they've been in a bad place politically. They have been humiliated. Their resources have been stolen from them. Now, if you in my family, my in-laws, they will tell you, well, that's all because of the British. And for some reason, there's a mythology, not a mythology maybe, but a story in Iran that it's all the fault of the British. And that whatever happens in Iran was caused by the British. Well, the British did some pretty negative things in Iran. But there is, all of this, what you saw, I think, its constitutional revolution probably earlier than any other country in the Middle East, 1906. But it failed. Didn't take. Other countries it did. Iran tried to nationalize its oil in 1951. That failed. But in Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal in 1955, 56, and that succeeded. In other words, the pattern seems to be, Iranians will tell you this, we do something. We had our green movement in 2009 that failed. The Arabs come along in 2011 and they succeed. They said, we do things, we fail. Some others come along and succeed. Don't know why, but it seems to be a reality. There is that sense of struggle, setback, and failure. Okay, question over here. Gentleman over here.
Yes, what question you do of the centrality of psychology? Question your view about the centrality of psychology to the negotiating events, as reflected in this slide. I have little doubt that if we set the nuclear issue aside, there would be lots that the U.S. and Iran could talk about. The time is on their side as far as the nuclear issue. And I wonder if you can suggest any incentive we could give them for backing off from their goal of having a nuclear capability.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you believe that Iran intends to build a nuclear weapon?
I said nuclear capability, perhaps in the sense that they could rapidly build a nuclear weapon.
Okay.
Or deliver the technology to others.
Because I don't know the answer to that question. I just do not know. I do know this, that a nuclear weapon, I mean, look, the Islamic Republic says that the main threat to its survival is internal sedition, internal dissidence supported by outsiders. The British, the Americans, the Israelis, the Arabs, and others. Now, what does a nuclear weapon do against street demonstrators? Well, not much. It doesn't give you that kind of security against what you consider to be the main threat. I'll tell you one other story, which was quite illustrative for me. You know that when President Ahmadinejad likes New York, comes to New York a lot to the General Assembly, and he does events while he was here. He did an event at Columbia a few years ago. He also invites American academics, people like me and others who follow things Iranian. And he gives a dinner and exchanges, and to his credit, he'll sit for like 2 hours in these exchanges. Someone asked him a few years ago, it wasn't me, I didn't ask him this question, but someone asked him, Mr. President, does Iran want a nuclear weapon? Iran want a nuclear weapon? And he said, no, we do not want a nuclear weapon. We are opposed to it ideologically. It's expensive, it's not politically effective, it's a weapon of murder, only a weapon of murder, it's dangerous, all these things. I don't know, do you believe him? I don't know. But then he said something which to me was very interesting. He said, but the decision to build a nuclear weapon is our decision. That's our decision. You, the United States, you, the P5+1, you, the Security Council, you, the IAEA, you can't tell us what to do. In other words, it's our national, it's a matter of national pride, national rights, whether we do it or not. Now, we don't want to do it, but whether we do it or not, that's our decision to make. What are we talking about? We're talking about, when we talk about the nuclear weapons, we're talking about the additional protocol, the Article 3.1, LEU, HEU, all these technical and legal stuff. The Iranians are talking about something different. They're talking about their place in the world, their national rights, their national dignity. We're talking
talking about obligations, they are talking about rights. And that's another reason, getting back to the original question of why we see this particular issue seems very difficult to reach agreement. You want to follow up?
Given how it would enhance their local influence, maybe more relevant to have.
Pardon?
Given how it would enhance Iran's local influence if they had the nuclear capability, and to your point about even if they're concerned about sedition, and even if they're more concerned about that, what concretely could we offer them in negotiation? We can't say it. We can't offer them to suppress sedition if they give up the nuclear weapon. They have that problem in any case. So what can we offer them?
Good. What they say they want. Now, in a negotiation, I agree. Sometimes what someone says they want and what they really want are different. What they say they want is respect, their rights. Now, that's difficult for a State Department lawyer to handle. I mean, I know a lot of good State Department lawyers, but they don't deal very well with things like that. So they say they want respect, they want their rights, but they also say they want some relief from the sanctions. I mean, I've always said what we need to do, and this is not, I'm not a great admirer, I know this is an apolitical group, but I must admit, I'm not a great admirer of Richard Nixon. Was never a big fan. But he did, when he went to China in 1972, he did something very interesting. He took a yellow pad and he drew a line down the middle, and on one side he wrote, what do we want? What do they want? It's very simple. It sounds very simple. But as far as I'm aware, in the case of Iran, we've never done that. What do they want and what do we want? Nobody has ever sort of done that in this case. And so, as a result, we are making offers that we think are interesting, and they dismiss them. They are making offers they think are interesting, and they dismiss them, and we're stuck there. Sir, you've been very patient. More question. What? Is this the last one? Okay, I'm told this is the last question. As you can see, I'm figuratively and literally married to my subject, so get started. Please.
Thank you, Ambassador Limbert. The title of your talk is Iran and US and its enemies. And you did give a picture.
With a question mark.
Exactly, that's why I'm asking this question. First point, I don't think that when we are talking eternal animosity, one should look at it. I don't think that there could be animosity between peoples. One is to make a distinction between peoples and the governments, politicians. As Mrs. Kimmelman referred on her visit, if I understood very correctly, she was met by Iranian people with some warmth. That's my first point. Secondly, sir, what struck me a bit, you did give a historical development starting from centuries up to now, and you did give, for instance, the example during President Carter's time, the visit of Prime Minister of Iran, that how Iran and America was friendly. But I think, and I ask apology to remind that there has been a period which US, Iran, and all that area used to be allies for at least, what I'm talking about, an institution which was created between US, UK, Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, which used to be called CENTCOM.
Could I ask you to get to your question so I can
Yeah,
address it? Please. Please, I ask you to be brief.
What I want to touch, you have never referred that period, which during the period of Central and also the Belknap Pact, which existed between these countries, where I'm driving at, shouldn't we look here from our own side? Have we ever done from our own part, and I was asking from the US part, something wrongs which have abolished all that good relation which existed, first with Iraq, the military coup which has happened, what have we done at that time? Secondly, in Iran, I remember very well when President Carter had spent, if I recall well, Christmas or the New Year in the palace of the Shah. And a few months later, we couldn't even accept the Shah to come to get the treatment here. And we didn't show a kind of animosity for the religious.
Okay, let me go at what I think is your question.
I look to the Pakistan, our relations,
you
which are going there.
You need to finish up for the sake of the other two.
My question is that, was there any reason why you avoided that? I mean, to take the example, how the relationship at one period was good, why it deteriorated, why it came to now. Sorry, sir. Thank you.
No, thank you. No, you've hit on a good point, which, as I said, I think I did characterize at least the last 30 years of our relationship as being this road to nowhere. I called it a cycle of a downward spiral. I called it a cycle of futility. But saying that this was not always the case in the past. No, the reality is that both sides have grievances against each other. They have real grievances and they have imagined grievances. But part of the futility, I can think of nothing more unproductive than for two parties to sit and recite their grievances against each other. I think the psychologists call that kitchen sinking, the other person. You throw everything but the kitchen sink. I was in an exchange with an Iranian official once. Now, again, because I'm not official, I can do this, but I was in an exchange with an Iranian official once, and he went through and he said, what about 1953? What about the shooting down the aircraft? What about support for the MEK? What about this? What about that? And I said, we risk becoming like an old married couple. We just recite grievances in each other. If I were an official, I would come back to you and I would talk about what about this and what about that. I said, but I don't think that's helpful. And he looked at me and he said, you're right. Just trading grievances isn't useful. But what about this? And why did you do these other things? I mean, I believe that such an approach, while you recognize the past, you don't get away from it. I did a study of U.S. and Iranian negotiation, and I call it wrestling the ghosts of history. We get into a room with Iranians, there are ghosts in the room. There are the ghosts of Mossadegh, there's the ghost of Kim Roosevelt, there's the ghosts of the hostage crisis. There are all these ghosts out there, and like it or not, they will haunt you. You can't ignore them. I often say, and I will end on this note, that what this relationship needs is, of course, the Ghostbusters.